Welcome back, folks. This week we're very excited as we are joined by Micha Cooper-Edwards. Micha is the founder and CEO of Soleil Space, Inc., a transcultural media company specializing in film and television production, elevating stories and creators of the global South diasporas of Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, and the Middle East. Micha is a media entrepreneur with a vision to unite and empower the world's diverse diasporas through the connective and enlightening power of media. She has led marketing efforts and worked with the top iconic global brands such as Nike, Jordan Brand, PepsiCo, Diageo, and Moet Hennessy. I've heard of a few of those. Micha is a proud donor of Trinidad and Tobago, an alumna of Howard University and the London School of Economics, and was recently named to the Forbes Next 1000, an esteemed list of upstart entrepreneurs redefining the American dream. Micha Cooper-Edwards, so happy that you could join us today. Thanks for being with us on Inclusive.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here.
So good to have you. It's such an honor, Micha. So at Soleil, you are interested in elevating the stories of creators from the global South. What did you see as a producer or working for production companies that made you say, I need to start something to address what I have experienced or see as a problem?
Yeah, I'll back up a little bit just to give some context because how we came to this point was a bit of a journey. I'm an outsider to the film and TV industry, right? Some people don't think that. I still feel like I am even 6, 7 years in. And that's because, as you said, most of my career, my early career was spent on the consumer marketing, corporate marketing side of things, right? My desire to be a producer was something that was started out as just a normal person who loved film and TV, who loved storytelling, got tired of doing commercial storytelling and wanted to tell a lot deeper stories. But it was because I had seen the gaps on the commercial storytelling side that I yearned to tell the stories on a deeper level. And it was almost as though I was connecting the dots between, that systemic underrepresentation in the corporate, commercial world, and then also seeing it in film and TV and just getting more and more obsessed with it. And so I decided to go study the industry. So my career switch into film and TV was first as a student. I wanted to look at it systemically. I wanted to study it theoretically and understand what were like the fundamental things that led to where we are. And what that did is it made me stumble into film industries in other parts of the world outside of Hollywood. Because even though I grew up in Trinidad and the Caribbean, most of the films and TV series that we ingested was still either American, and then to a much lesser extent, British or Australian soap operas, right? And so,
Yeah.
so I always was like, where is our like documentary on, the iconic prime ministers of the Caribbean? Or where is the story of a girl like me growing up in the Caribbean and moving to the US? Like, where are those? But on a premium level, not cheap YouTube,
Right.
video, right? And so to answer your question, studying the industry, understanding Nollywood, which is the Nigerian film industry, how that had evolved, Bollywood, Turkish film, all these different industries of film and TV. But as people of color in the West, we don't get to see that content. We don't even get to see our own content in our own countries. And so that's where it really started. And I felt like, wow, there needs to be a bridge, right? My first attempt at that bridge was as a producer, because producers in the industry are the ones who project manage. They're the ones that raise the financing, market and take the film to market, right? And so that's where I thought my skills were most transferable. And a director that I was like, using as one of the subjects of my thesis in my master's program was like, you will be an excellent producer. And I was like, okay, explain to me exactly what a producer
What is
is.
that?
Yeah, because, you see all these credits and there's the line producer and field producer and EP and, you see all these things and the layman doesn't really know the difference. So he had to explain that to me. And that's how I started producing, was on his film,
Mm.
right?
Oh, wow.
And so now fast forward to answer your question, looking back, is that I always had that innate feeling of, especially being an immigrant in the US and having to explain myself so much, or, being dismissed as someone from a country that's not quite important. You guys are on the beach somewhere swinging on trees. You know what I mean? Like all these stereotypes and perceptions that you live with and that translate into every aspect of our lives. And so when I
And
was
even what's depicted on TV and movies, right?
correct, or not depicted at all, because
Right.
as a member of the Black diaspora, and I think every ethnic diaspora deals with this, where there's a dominant, even within the underrepresentation, then there are these token representatives of a whole diaspora, which
Right.
comprises of so many different, nuances and intersectionalities and subcultures, right? And so for us, it's the African American archetype. So I don't even hear myself on screen. That person looks like me, but they don't sound like me. They didn't grow up like me. They seen snow. I never saw snow until I was 18, right? Like, things like that, right? So
Right.
when I started producing, I started doing independent projects of my own, but I also was working for production companies. I realized that there was definitely no appetite to tell stories and invest at
Mm.
a certain level in filmmakers from, backgrounds of color around the world, particularly outside the US and even inside the US. There wasn't an understanding of why our stories would be viable commercially, why they were important to tell. Even when they chose to tell them, there was a lack of understanding of how they needed to be told so that they would remain authentic. And so, between doing my own independent projects, struggling to raise financing for those projects, or even trying to get, projects from filmmakers who would approach us to like get their films, and TV series like greenlit, these hoops that we had to run through, the pains that we had to go through, I would say even abuses that we experienced in the industry, that was like where the experience came from that breathed into Soleil,
Mm.
and realizing that it needed to be a systemic approach to it, that production alone couldn't solve it, and that we needed to create an ecosystem that was fairly independent of Hollywood. And we just
Mhm.
started laying the foundations for those. So in 2019 was when I decided to kind of make the leap to go from just being an independent project by project producer
Mhm.
to building a production company. But then going through those rigors, we also realized that we needed to be more than a production company, that the people that really control the industry are the ones that control financing and distribution. And
Mm.
so, how do you kind of create that independent ecosystem?
I love that, Mika. And so thanks for walking us through that. So you worked in marketing and big productions, and then now you're working to build your own tech media company. And so I'm just wondering about the differences between how do you think about diversity and from different perspectives of storytelling. So, telling stories and then also building a company and just any thoughts on on the differences between the two or just your experiences in those different areas.
I guess when I was in the corporate marketing world, you would have looked at the diversity more from a very personal point of view. Now, we were in a very, I'll speak to the Nike experience specifically, right? Because that was the longest stint
Hmm.
and very foundational for me as a marketer, right? It was a very weird juxtaposition because here I am working on Nike basketball products where the athletes are Black
Hmm.
primarily,
Yep.
the consumers are primarily Black, but I'm living in Oregon, right?
Mm.
I'm a Black Trinidadian woman, young, living in Oregon, and most of my coworkers are white.
Hmm.
Right.
So there was a strange dilemma that you were always grappling with. And because you're not sitting above everything, looking at it from a very long-term organizational development perspective, but you innately feel this conflict, right? And then you add the layer of my existence as not being American in a very American or Western, I should say, American and European dominated organization as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where most of the dollars even went from a marketing perspective or merchandising and all of that. So the emerging markets, I ended up being very much representing a lot of the international regions, right? I always ended up on the international side of the businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And so having to then advocate for why Japan needed their own Air Jordan style that was worth investing in.
Sure.
Why Manu Ginobili from Argentina was an athlete that we should be elevating at a certain level, right? With 3 championships at the time, like why all these stories were just as rich and just as important and worth investing in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why the Jordan brand needed to dimensionalize and be, global, because growing up in Trinidad, I was up late at night watching him play.
Mm-hmm.
What was the story of me watching him play from a Caribbean perspective, right? So all of these things were very much from the lens of my role and what were the constraints, right? That were on my ability to bring my true experience, my true self to a world that actually at the end point were people just like me, but what was in the middle was like a lot of barriers.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Then coming now to where we are now, I have the benefit of, because I am like empowered to build the organization, I could look at the inside out approach and all the dots have to connect. So from who we hire, if you look at my team, we look like an old Benetton commercial, and everybody's all over the world. And sometimes that means investing in people before they have a certain level of experience, but you see the potential. They're bringing a certain cultural perspective that is really important to be represented.
I love that.
Then the filmmakers, right, that we work with, and the platform that we're building, and the board, right, that we put together.
Sure.
All of that then has to connect. And so I look at it very holistically. I look at it in terms of walking the talk, and it has to be inside out, because if it's not, it's going to affect the business at the end of the day, right? There's going to be that gap at some part of that food chain, I guess, if you want to call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That weak link is going to show, it's going to expose at some point or the other. So I'm trying to take the approach of making sure that our mission is reflected in every aspect, every layer, externally, internally of the organization. And then that will emanate out through the business that we do.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, the intentionality is so critical, and we hear that often in the work that Rob and I do as it pertains to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just aligning everything you do back to your organizational values and mission. And so I really appreciate that. You had mentioned earlier, just as you were growing Soleil and looking for maybe the funding, without it, you hinted to it being maybe not such a great experience, and without it being triggering for you, I'd love to understand how you raised money. Like, how did you approach? Was it hard to sell your vision and the mission to investors, maybe in the North American or European markets? I'm just curious, like, what was that experience?
Yeah, it was, and it still is to some extent. So like I mentioned, we started out as just doing production,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there were challenges on the production side of things. And now we're doing tech and digital media, right? Like we're much broader. And so it's a different type of fundraising, right? The whole venture capital world. I just stumbled upon a Bloomberg, like 2 headlines back to back where they, this was, I think, Wednesday's issue of Bloomberg, where they had Black founders get a third of what their counterparts get, right,
Mhm.
from VC funding,
Yep.
right?
Right. Yeah.
And
In
then
terms of the
Black
investment level, right? So
the
if
actual investment, the level of
yeah,
investment that they get,
yeah, yep.
right? Or we get. And then within that, we have men, you have women, right?
Mhm.
You have, by,
Abilities.
transgender and all of that. You have
Right.
abilities, you have all of that. So Black women within that is 0.3% of total VC funding,
Yep,
right?
yep.
Okay.
And so to answer your question of how we raise money, it was a combination of just leveraging the networks that I had, which were not in the film industry,
Mm.
but who believed in me, right? And believed that they understood, they knew that this was something that was not, I didn't just wake up and decide to do. They knew that even in a different realm,
hmm
that this was something I always advocated for. And they know my work ethic and they know my ethics and, all of that. And so that was how we were able to raise our first money in actually came from, for the tech company, came from a group of very senior ex-Nike female executives
hmm
who saw the vision for the platform specifically and were like, hey, like, we need to be your first money in here,
Yeah.
And that was great.
That's awesome.
And then there's
Yeah.
a second group that is led by, a Caribbean, very prominent Black Caribbean person who, is huge in the real estate world, again, outside of film, right? But they saw that this was something that was important because from outsiders looking in, they knew that this is something they had not seen before, right? But when it comes to the traditional VC type of institutional investors, it still is difficult and it's not just for me, it's for everyone. And so what we did actually, even prior to raising money for the platform, when we were on the production side, whatever projects that we were able to get revenue for, I just simply did not pay myself.
hmm
And we reinvested, I would say 90% of that into building out the rest of the company, bootstrapping, making a ton of sacrifices to basically get to where we are right now. So it's a combination of people who know you, believing in you, just to give you that push, and a combination of you believing in yourself and deciding, you know what, I have to just do what, not wait for that money to come,
Right.
make those sacrifices and be as resourceful as possible with what we have. And the
Sure.
sacrifice hasn't just been my sacrifice, the team has made sacrifices as well, right? Like some team members work on equity bases, a combination of compensation and equity. That is something that we've had to do just to kind of keep the train moving.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
I was interested in your perspective on, a couple of years ago, Netflix had the big hit with Squid Game, and the narrative around that was, so that show was created in South Korea, and the narrative was this is going to be the norm, right? So some of the streamers, so the shows it would be just from everywhere, would be distributed, and get a lot of distribution from the streamers. Has that happened for shows from the global South? Has that continued, or has that been a struggle in the way that it hasn't necessarily panned out the way that folks thought it would?
Yeah, not sustainably. And it's been very much of a cherry picking exercise. So, taking it from the filmmaker's perspective, there's still a lot of filmmakers who do really great quality work, go into the festival circuit. And this is research that we did before we started building the streaming platform that we're going to release in a month, right? We were looking at, okay, festival is kind of the benchmark, right? For quality, critical acclaim for the most part. So we looked at the top 20 film festivals
hmm
globally. And we said, how many of the films that were programmed in these festivals? And the reason why we looked at the top 20 is because that's where the buyers go, right? Beyond that, most of the festivals aren't what they call market festivals where you could get your film sold,
hmm
right?
hmm
Hardly any of them beyond
Sure.
that top 20. So how many of the films that got programmed in that top 20 got any, were from people of color? We first looked at the diversity of what was programmed. That was 30%. We were looking at this for a 5-year period,
Mhm.
right? Then from that 30%, how many of those films got any distribution outside of festival? That was also 30%. That's
Mhm.
9%. All films that meet that benchmark of quality, high production value, etc.,
Wow.
and won't get any distribution out of festival. So from there, a Netflix might come along and they're picking from the 9%, right? Of that 9%, they may have one or two from some key markets in the global south that they feel are hotspots, right? And they overinvest in those hotspots. And that's how you get a Squid Game.
Mhm.
But what happens to the 70% that never came through? And then
Right.
what happens to the rest of that 9%? Okay, some of them might get some distribution, but then they get geofenced. A big point that you made there is that they're not offered to the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
Because there's this kind of strange assumption that only Middle Eastern people will want to see a Middle Eastern film.
Yes.
Right.
You know,
Yeah. That's so,
right?
yeah.
The
Right.
Only a Jamaican will want to see a Jamaican film. So let's just offer this to Jamaica. And even in some cases, people from that region can't even see that film
Yeah.
because they don't open it up to that particular region where this
Oh,
film
interesting.
crosses over into from a storytelling perspective. So
Sure.
those films are not set up to succeed on those
Oh.
platforms. Then, okay, they make it on the platform. They might get like small licensing fees, very, very limited windows. You can't find them. So you
Yeah.
go on, right? The Squid Games or Shonda Rhimes' last film or,
Yeah.
a big, Reese Witherspoon's next door. That comes to you, right? How do you
Bridgerton.
find,
Right.
right?
Right.
How do you find those independent filmmakers who are fresh, authentic, edgy voices that will really push things forward or pushing culture forward, right? So look
Right.
at all of the barriers
Yeah.
and look at the numbers, right? And, you're looking at like at least 2,000 films a year in that pipeline that don't really get seen globally.
When you said,
So,
yeah, when you said cherry picking, I
yeah,
thought there's an endless supply of crappy shows that are streamed to me, but I don't necessarily see those things that are quality that are outside of
right.
what.
And even when they decide, okay, let's invest in diversity, they say, okay, India has a big industry. Let's just like do a ton of Indian films because we think that's a big market. But what happened to Pakistan? What happened to Sri Lanka?
Mhm.
Right? What
Right.
happens to all these Southeast and
Bangladesh.
East, right?
Right.
Bangladesh, right? Like, and that goes for every region. There's that kind of, here's a big market that we're going to develop in that region, and
Mm.
everything else is kind of fighting for the scraps,
Mhm.
and you hear it from the filmmakers, but you also see it from the consumer side of things as well.
sure.
So,
Right. It just continues to stress the point that folks making decisions, there's bias that creeps in decision making. And then we think of algorithms, like how things are pushed to us too, right? Like I'll open my Netflix, it's completely different than when I go to my parents' house and their Netflix is it's all Bollywood, right? So it's just so interesting to me how there's even bias just in that.
and sorry, I'll just say this really quick.
Sure.
Even within, you use the example of Bollywood. Bollywood is not Indian, is not representative of Indian film.
Mm.
Bollywood is a region of Indian film,
Sure.
right?
Right.
South in India in particular, right? There's a whole other set of genres of films that come out of India based on different regional and cultural influences
Right.
that you don't
Language.
see. Language, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Religion, right?
Right.
Like all these things. And so there's a lot of backlash actually happening with Bollywood even now because some of these industries have been set up as replicas of Hollywood in those countries with the same kind of class structure, same kind of exclusion happening in different ways. So I should mention that as well. So yeah.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you did. Absolutely. So, Micha, looking at your website, the podcast that you do, your short film Saturday series, it would be crazy for us not to ask you what some of your favorite shows or recommendations for films from the Global South that you feel are not to be missed. Do you have any recommendations for our audience? Where should we start?
Oh boy, there's so many. There's so many.
Give us like your top 3.
I would say there's a film called Rocks that was done out of the UK. It's possible it's on Amazon. That really kind of showed the young Black British experience
Mhm.
that I thought was amazing. In the UK as well, I would say, the Small Act series
Mhm.
would be great to watch as well. Kind of getting away from that side of things. There are a lot of Turkish films that I think are excellent. There's a whole list I could probably provide you guys when you
Yeah.
Well,
put it
Well,
up.
what we'll do is we'll add them to the show notes for
Yeah,
sure.
African film Atlantic is a film I think everybody should see. It was pretty groundbreaking. And then there are a lot of classic films like, Yuzan Palsi, who's a Haitian filmmaker. She just got honored with an honorary Oscar. Sugar Cane Alley, which was her first film, was really pivotal for Caribbean film.
mm,
I think people should definitely look at those. And well, shameless plug here,
yeah.
but
Yep.
on our streaming platform, which, we're calling the world's first truly global community streaming platform. So it really challenges how we stream, how we discover all of the things that I just talked about to break those barriers down. Um, watch a lot of those films on the Soleil Space streaming platform
Yes.
because those are all films that haven't gotten any distribution globally, but went through the festival circuits and are from some of the hottest emerging filmmakers across the global South diasporas, all in one experience,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
look out for that from us, and you'll be able to watch quite a bit of stuff that you would not see anywhere
I
else.
have to totally
That's
agree with
excellent.
you. I was on the website, and it's a bit of a rabbit hole. You start wanting to watch about everything on that site and listen to the podcast as well, because there's really some fascinating people that you also interview as guests on your podcast too. So
Yeah,
I
spoiler,
totally
spotlights.
agree.
Yeah, that's
And we'll post some links to your site as well, and then any other recommendations that you have as well. So,
Yeah.
Mika Cooper Edwards, we really enjoyed having you today and in this conversation. Such a great opportunity to talk, uh,
thank you.
media and technology with you. And please come back and see us again. It's been
Yes.
great having you.
Well, definitely. Thanks so much for having me. This was fun. I really
Thank
enjoyed speaking with like-minded people on this topic. This was really great.
Yes, yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
We'll be right back with our calm reflections and raves and rants.